morning. This morning I'm Wesley Owen's coffee shop, one of my favorite coffee shops, and I'm Chad McAllister, the husband to the founder of Mom's Kids Books, and here with just a delightful, fascinating person. Actually met you at this coffee shop.
Yes, we did.
Because the coffee shop owner is very good at putting people together with similar interests.
Just like a bartender.
Go figure, right?
Yeah.
And one of my key interests is just really passionate about helping kids become better readers. And at Mom Kids Books, we do that by helping people find just really good books. Books that are both engaging for kids to read and also worth their time to read, you know? If you're gonna read a book, we figure you might as well read a good one, right?
Right.
So, and when we first met, I think we ended up spending like 2 hours because I was so interested in the research you've done, because you were looking at education and the influence of gender, the differences between boys and girls, right?
Right.
So, and officially we should say this is Dr. Lynnette Simm.
Yeah.
And could you just share a little bit about the nature of that research, the kinds of things you're doing?
Absolutely. My research began about 7 years ago, trying to understand the differences between women learners and male learners. I was really more focused on learning disabilities. I myself have dyslexia, so I started to focus on that. But my degree evolved, and with educational leadership, I wanted to do more than just focus on my deficiency, but to see the differences between the two genders in order to help teachers, future teachers, be better teachers by understanding that. So my research kind of morphed into understanding how single-sex schools, especially their teachers, are teaching subjects to an all-girl class and an all-boy class, and what modifications are they doing? And in doing so, I went to one of the local schools here in Colorado that is a single-sex classroom. It's a co-ed environment, which means boys and girls go to the same school, but when it's class time, they break up into gender. And sitting and talking with a lot of the teachers, I realized that they didn't have a lot of the information they needed to make those modifications. So understanding the differences in genders wasn't something that they had a background in. So I started asking questions. Well, what do you need to know about? You know, what would you like to know about? And they wanted to know a lot of things about motivating students. What's the difference? They wanted to know about learning styles. What's the difference? A lot of my English teachers, how can I get the boys to read this book? How can I get the girls to read this book? And even just math concepts, you know, the cognitive development timeline and how they're different. And then, of course, we started moving into the psychological differences as well. But it really all came back down to the physiology between men and women. And it's not just the gender per se, it's the differences in the way we hear, in the way we see, in the way we perceive our world and take in information.
So there's some real DNA-driven
Oh,
differences.
yes, definitely. It's easier to say how we're alike, the fact that we are both humans, than to say how we're similar. How we're different, because there are so many differences.
Sure. And I think anyone who has been a parent may recognize this better when you have a boy and a girl as a parent,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Because we see, you know, almost from birth,
Yes.
there does appear to be some differences that show up.
And there's a lot of things that people associate with societal changes. Boys like trucks, girls like Barbies, and that's society inputting that.
Sure.
But research shows that even infants, you know, days old, haven't seen a Barbie in their life yet. If given a mobile of faces, the girls are just entertained. Doesn't even have to move. The boys, if it doesn't move, it's not fascinating. They love the movement.
Like the movement.
And so it's those things that are innate in people, in the genders. And it's really kind of interesting that the teachers started to ask me to come and present information. So I started doing free free consulting with them, and then I came in as a paid seminar presenter for their professional development, and I started presenting the information, and it was just eye-opening to them as to the differences and how they can manipulate their classrooms. And so that's how my dissertation evolved into what it is, and well, you know, it's exciting, and I'm very passionate about it.
Good.
So.
Thank you, Dr. Simm. I appreciate it. I know that we could talk for a much longer time
Yes.
about all that. I'm curious about, specifically about the reading aspect. Did you come across differences between boys and girls with regard to reading or reading issues or their interests in that?
Yeah, there's a lot of differences, but when you're talking specifically about reading, you're talking more than just genres. Okay, of course, it's easy to say that girls like more romance novels, more people books. They want to see the relationship evolve in their stories, and younger boys prefer the more action, the more engaging, the more movements that they can see. But also, you also have that cognitive development line where girls will be more apt to want to learn to read at an earlier age than boys. Now again, I have to preface this by saying that these are generalizations.
Right.
There are always
broad brush over painting.
Always individuals who, at 2 can read, male or female. And so these are just broad generalizations. So the main difference is that boys like to be able to see what they read in real life, have that connection. Dr. Sachs, one of the leaders in gender studies and president of the National Association for Single-Sex Education, talks about how boys need to have a knowledge, to know something, not to merely bring it into their mind, but to actually feel, experience it. So if you talk about trucks or you talk about tractors, and then you're driving down the road and you start pointing them out to your son, he gets more excited. Let's go look at it again. Let's go read it again. And so that kind of builds the excitement.
Something real and physical.
And so the most thing that you can do for boys is to read them something that they're interested in. If they even mention dragons or they mention spiders or rockets, then
I was going to say rockets is a great one. I know in the case of my son, he likes reading about things that move,
Right.
He's always in motion. It doesn't surprise me a lot that he likes things that are in motion, So race cars and rocket ships and airplanes and trains. He really likes reading about things that have movement as part of the
And
story.
so that's when you read the book and then you go watch NASCAR or go to your local track. And that's when it really starts to become that interconnective knowledge that boys need. Girls are a little bit different in that they like that knowledge as well, but it's more on a personal basis. Boys will be more than happy to read the book on their own once they became able to do it. Girls still thrive and yearn to read together. And so to really engage a small child to learn to read, especially a female, sitting together in that close proximity. With boys, it could be very similar like this, and we read the book like that. Girls want that connection, where if it's just your arm touching, and then it's you read, and that contact, where it's that intimate moment, because to them, they're building relationships. The story sometimes matters, but most time, it's that connection with the person. And so when you're trying to get your daughter to read, make that bond. That's what they really, really want. When you're trying to get your son to read, make sure they get that connection to the real world, that this is really happening, that these things are really possible, and that they can touch and feel them, and it gets their excitement going. And so those are the 2 main differences when it comes to reading.
Good. Those are really good tips. I appreciate you sharing those. And it's interesting for you to talk about that. When my daughter was young, she's our first child, we would just read to her quite a bit, and every night we had a standard routine, right, which involved telling a story that we'd make up, and then reading a section of a book. And we have a favorite Bible book that we go through with little kid stories from the Bible, right? We would always do that. And usually another book too, and that just seemed like good bonding time, And I never at all thought about why that might be. And I have noticed now that she's 8. Recently, we were just at Friends, and they had a daughter that's a little bit older, a few years older, and I saw the 2 of them just sitting down reading, their own books, sitting on a couch together, and she just looked so happy just doing that, and maybe it was this issue of relationship.
Yeah,
that
it is.
She was enjoying.
And you'll notice a generalization is a lot of women prefer to do things with someone around. They don't have to necessarily do it the same thing.
Right.
I mean, as a wife, I don't mind cleaning the kitchen. I don't mind cooking dinner. I don't like really doing it all by myself. So I'm not saying that I need my two daughters in there and, you know, flour going everywhere, but just them sitting in the kitchen talking to me is like, I'm doing it with purpose. I'm doing it for the relationship. And that's how reading can be for young kids, young girls. They want that relationship that comes with that. The solitude, some, again, broad generalizations, there are some girls that can get a good book. My daughter sometimes, when she gets a really good book, now she's 12 now, she'll go off into her room. She wants to really dive into it and become part of that book, and she needs all distractions gone.
Okay.
And yet other times she's like, hey Mom, let's read this book together. And so I read a chapter, then she reads a chapter. My 9-year-old loves that. She's still working on speed, and in the 4th grade, they're trying to get past phonics and onto speed and comprehension. So we really sit down and read. I'll read a page, and we'll talk about it. That was pretty interesting, and just, you know, chat about it. Then she reads a page, and then I read a page, and she just loves that connection between the two of us. But it's also very important that dads do it too.
Oh, very good. Yeah, we want to keep the dads involved.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. So some good tips here with boys. I'm sure this applies for girls too. Find things they're truly interested in.
Right.
And maybe more tangible things for younger boys. You know,
definitely
the
that
trucks,
action,
the things they can see, the
those
things
movement
they can touch,
things, yes,
and action oriented, and keep that relationship aspect in mind for girls. You know, and maybe just the simple act of reading next to them, reading with them some of the time, and helping to also foster that relationship as a family too.
Right, because it's the love of books. It really is. A lot of parents say, but my kid doesn't like to read. Well, they would probably like to read with you. And if they're not as good a reader, then that's okay. Remember, it's a learning thing. Yeah. You've just got to continue to foster it. And they may not be avid readers, and that's okay. But they're going to be able to enjoy and pull out what they need from anything that they read in the future.
Yeah. And I know we still, even with slightly older kids, Cooper's starting to read, and Caitlin's a very good reader. We still enjoy just reading out loud together some of the time.
Yeah, that oral reading is a really wonderful thing to practice. That's another thing is a lot of students have a lot of anxiety when it comes to oral presentations because they've never read aloud. And so it's really great to foster that as well. And I can talk to you later about the differences between oral presentations for males and oral presentations for females.
That would be great. I look forward to doing that.
Oh, good.
Great. Well, Dr. Simm, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me,
Yeah,
Chad.
appreciate your time.
All right, have a great day.
Thanks.